The late afternoon sun, diffused by the intricate patterns of the stained glass windows, painted the interior of St. Michael's Church in jewel-toned hues. Crimson, gold, and sapphire light pooled across the well-worn surfaces of the wooden pews. It was a hushed Tuesday, the kind where the world outside felt muted, a distant hum of traffic the only reminder that life rushed on beyond these sanctuary walls. Near the back, in the tranquil stillness, knelt 7-year-old Margaret Sullivan. Her small hands were pressed together, fingers interlaced, in an attitude of earnest prayer. She knew the rote recitations her mother had patiently taught her, the familiar verses echoing in her mind. But today, her words sprang forth from a deeper place, from the raw, unfiltered honesty that only resided in the heart of a child. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice barely carrying in the vast, silent space, "please help my mommy. She works so hard, and she's always tired. And please, God, I just want a dad for mommy. Someone who will make her smile like she used to. Someone who will stay. Amen." Unbeknownst to young Margaret, she was not alone in her solitude. 3 rows behind her sat Thomas Bennett, a man of 41 years, his presence marked by the impeccably tailored navy suit that spoke of high-stakes business meetings and hushed boardrooms. He had slipped into the church on a sudden impulse, a desperate craving for a moment of quiet amidst the relentless clamor of his day. A particularly grueling morning of complex negotiations had left him frayed, seeking solace in the unexpected serenity of the church. He had been sitting there, a world away in his own thoughts, immersed in the intricate dance of mergers and market shares, when the sound of a small voice, clear as a bell, cut through his preoccupied state. Initially, Thomas had attempted to ignore it, to respect the sacred privacy of the child's prayer. But the poignant simplicity of her words, carried on the still air, pierced through the carefully constructed walls he had erected around his heart. "I just want a dad for mommy." The heartfelt plea resonated within him, a discordant chord in the symphony of his meticulously planned life. Thomas felt something subtle shift in his chest, a long dormant ember flickering to life. He had dedicated the last 15 years of his existence to transforming Bennett Industries from a fledgling startup into a multimillion-dollar empire. In his unwavering pursuit of success, he had sacrificed personal relationships, missed countless holidays, consistently choosing the demands of work over the simple joys of human connection. At some undefined point along the way, he had ceased to even consider the possibility of family, of children, of anything beyond the relentless pursuit of the next deal, the next conquest. But the raw vulnerability of this child's prayer served as a stark reminder of something profoundly essential that he had long forgotten: the fundamental human need for connection, for love, for belonging, for family. The girl rose from her kneeling position, smoothing down the fabric of her simple tan dress, the slightly worn hem a testament to its frequent use. She gazed around the vast expanse of the church with wide, hopeful eyes, as if anticipating that someone, somewhere, had indeed heard her heartfelt prayer and might be on the verge of answering it immediately. Then, with the measured steps of a child who had been taught to be respectful in sacred spaces, she made her way towards the heavy wooden doors. An inexplicable impulse took hold of Thomas. He found himself rising to his feet and following her, though he couldn't articulate the precise reason for his actions. As they both emerged from the cool, shadowed interior of the church into the warmth of the afternoon light, he observed a woman approaching them from across the street. Her blonde hair, catching the golden rays of the sun, shimmered with a natural radiance. She was dressed in a simple beige dress, clean and neatly pressed, yet clearly indicative of a life lived on a budget. Her movements possessed the efficient grace of someone accustomed to multitasking, of perpetually feeling the relentless pressure of time constraints. "Mama," Margaret called out, her voice filled with unrestrained joy as she broke into a run to greet her. The woman's face softened into a radiant smile, and Thomas could immediately discern the depth of love in her expression. Yet, beneath the warmth, he also detected a weariness, a subtle etching of exhaustion that hinted at the burdens she carried. She appeared to be in her early 30s, her features bearing the vestiges of a carefree youth, marred only by the delicate worry lines that framed her expressive eyes. "There you are, sweetie," she said, reaching out to take Margaret's hand in hers. "I finished my shift early. Were you good for Father Michael?" "Father Michael wasn't here," Margaret replied, a hint of disappointment in her voice. "But I said my prayers all by myself. That's my good girl." Thomas remained on the church steps, a silent observer of this intimate exchange. He found himself compelled to act, to intervene in some way. He made a decision, one that surprised even himself with its audacity. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying across the quiet street. The woman turned instinctively, her arm tightening slightly around her daughter in a protective gesture. "Yes?" Thomas approached them slowly, conscious of not wanting to alarm her in any way. "I'm sorry to intrude. My name is Thomas Bennett. I was in the church just now, and I couldn't help but overhear." He paused, suddenly feeling foolish, acutely aware of the strangeness of his actions. What exactly was he doing? "Your daughter was praying." The woman's expression shifted, a wave of embarrassment washing over her features. She glanced down at Margaret with a gentle look of reproach. "Margaret, were you bothering this gentleman?" "No, no," Thomas interjected quickly, anxious to alleviate her concern. "Not at all. She didn't know I was there. I just—" He hesitated, searching for the appropriate words to convey the complex emotions that were swirling within him. "I was moved by her faith, and I wondered." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to propose. "This might sound strange, but would you and your daughter consider joining me for coffee? Or perhaps ice cream, just for the young lady?" The woman's eyes widened slightly, her protective instincts warring with a range of conflicting emotions. He saw a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even a hint of desperation, but overriding all was the cautious reserve of someone who had learned to be wary of strangers. "I don't usually accept invitations from strangers," she said carefully, her voice laced with polite firmness. "Of course not. I wouldn't expect you to," Thomas conceded readily. He reached into his wallet and extracted a business card, extending it towards her. "This is who I am. We could go to the cafe right across the street, very public, and if at any point you feel uncomfortable, you are free to leave. No questions asked." The woman accepted the card, her gaze intently focused on the embossed lettering. Her eyes widened imperceptibly as she registered the details. "Bennett Industries. You're the Thomas Bennett?" "I am. I've read about you in the newspaper. The education grant program you started last year." Thomas nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "That's right. We've been funding scholarships for underprivileged students." The woman looked down at her daughter, then back at Thomas, her mind working rapidly, weighing the potential risks against the perceived benefits. He could practically see her mental calculations, the careful assessment of probabilities. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she offered a tentative nod. "All right, just for a little while. My name is Eleanor, by the way. Eleanor Sullivan, and this is Margaret. It's a pleasure to meet you both." The cafe was warm and inviting, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and delectable pastries. Margaret's eyes widened in childlike wonder as she gazed at the tempting array of desserts displayed behind the glass counter. Thomas couldn't help but smile at her unbridled enthusiasm. "Pick anything you'd like," he told her generously. Eleanor started to protest, but Thomas gently raised a hand, silencing her. "Please, it would make me happy." Margaret, without hesitation, selected a chocolate cupcake adorned with vibrant pink frosting. They settled at a corner table, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. Thomas ordered coffee for himself and Eleanor, and a small glass of milk for Margaret. For a few moments, they sat in slightly awkward silence, observing Margaret as she meticulously deconstructed her cupcake, consuming the frosting first with obvious delight. "So," Eleanor began finally, breaking the stillness, "why did you really invite us here, Mr. Bennett?" Thomas appreciated her directness. He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I heard your daughter praying in the church, and it affected me in a way I didn't expect. Eleanor's cheeks flushed slightly, a delicate blush rising to the surface. What exactly did you hear? She was praying for you, for your well-being. Thomas hesitated, then decided to embrace complete honesty. She was praying for you to find someone, a father for her. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, a fleeting expression of pain crossing her face. Margaret, sweetheart, we've talked about this. Some prayers take time to be answered. I know, Mama, Margaret said, licking the remaining frosting from her fingers. But God hears all prayers. You told me so. He does, baby. He absolutely does. Thomas found himself compelled to ask, his voice gentle and laced with genuine concern. If you don't mind my asking, Margaret's father? Eleanor was silent for a moment, stirring her coffee slowly, as if carefully considering her words. He left when Margaret was 2, said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he needed to find himself, or some such thing. We haven't heard from him since. She looked up at Thomas, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. I've worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Waitress at the diner for the breakfast and lunch shifts, cleaning offices in the evenings, and weekend shifts at the grocery store. Margaret stays with my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, when I'm working. She's wonderful. But Eleanor's voice caught slightly, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her carefully constructed facade. It's not the same as having a parent there. You're doing an incredible job, Thomas said quietly, his voice filled with genuine admiration. That's clear. I'm doing the best I can, Eleanor replied, her gaze fixed on her daughter. But Margaret deserves better. She deserves stability. She deserves to have someone who can go to her school plays and help with homework and just be there. Thomas looked at the little girl, who was now engrossed in attempting to balance her spoon on her nose, completely oblivious to the adult conversation. He thought about his sterile penthouse apartment, his 70-hour work weeks, his meticulously scheduled life that left no room for spontaneity or connection. What if? He heard himself say, the words escaping almost involuntarily. I could help. Eleanor's guard went up immediately, her expression hardening. Mr. Bennett, I appreciate your kindness, but we're not looking for charity. That's not what I'm offering, Thomas said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Look, I know this sounds strange. We just met, but I've been thinking lately about what I'm doing with my life, about what really matters. And then I heard your daughter's prayer and it felt like a sign, maybe. A sign of what? Thomas leaned forward, choosing his words with deliberate care. I have more money than I know what to do with. I have a company that essentially runs itself at this point. But I don't have connection purpose beyond profit margins. When I heard Margaret praying, it reminded me that there are things more important than business. I still don't understand what you're suggesting, Eleanor said, though her expression had softened slightly, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. I'm not entirely sure myself, Thomas admitted with a small, self-deprecating laugh. But maybe we could get to know each other. No pressure, no expectations, just see what happens. I could help with Margaret, spend time with both of you, and if nothing else, you'd have someone to share the burden with, someone to call when you need help. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, her gaze searching, probing. You're serious? I am. But why? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Thomas struggled to articulate the complex emotions that were driving him. Have you ever felt like you were sleepwalking through your life? Going through the motions but not really living? That's where I've been for years. And then I heard a 7-year-old girl praying with such faith, such love for her mother, and it woke something up in me. It reminded me that life is about more than boardrooms and bottom lines. Margaret, who had been quietly observing the exchange, suddenly spoke up, her voice clear and innocent. Are you going to be my daddy? Margaret, Eleanor said, mortified, her cheeks flushing crimson. But Thomas smiled gently at the child, his eyes filled with warmth. I don't know, Margaret. That's not something that happens overnight. But I'd like to be your friend. Would that be okay? Margaret considered this seriously, her young face furrowed in thought. Will you come to my school play? We're doing The 3 Little Pigs. And I'm the third pig, the smart one. I would be honored to attend your school play, Thomas said solemnly. Over the following weeks, something unexpected began to unfold. Thomas began spending time with Eleanor and Margaret, proceeding with care and respect. He attended Margaret's play, sitting in the audience with genuine enthusiasm and clapping loudly when she took her bow. He helped Eleanor fix her aging car when it unexpectedly broke down, getting his expensive suit covered in grease, but not seeming to care in the slightest. He took them both to the Children's Museum on a Saturday, observing Eleanor's face as it lit up with genuine pleasure as she relaxed for the first time in years. Eleanor was hesitant at first, her trust a precious commodity, hard-earned after being abandoned and betrayed. But Thomas was patient, unwavering in his commitment. He showed up when he said he would. He called when he was running late, always offering a sincere apology. He asked about her day and genuinely listened to her answers, providing a sympathetic ear and thoughtful insights. He treated Margaret with kindness and respect, never attempting to replace her father, but simply being a consistent, positive presence in her life. One evening, approximately 2 months after their initial meeting, Thomas arranged for Mrs. Chun to babysit Margaret while he took Eleanor out to dinner. It was their first time truly alone together, and Eleanor seemed noticeably nervous, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "You don't have to be nervous," Thomas said gently as they sat down at their table. "This is just dinner between friends." "Is that what we are?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Friends?" Thomas looked at her, his gaze filled with a depth of emotion that words could scarcely convey. He saw a woman who had tirelessly worked herself to exhaustion to provide for her daughter, a woman who had maintained her dignity and her inherent kindness despite the immense hardships she had endured. He saw a woman who had slowly begun to trust him, despite every logical reason not to. "I'd like to be more than friends," he said honestly, his voice filled with sincerity. "If you're open to that. But only if it's what you want, Eleanor. Not because you need help or because I have money, but because you genuinely want to be with me." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears, reflecting the raw vulnerability of her heart. "Do you know how long it's been since someone asked me what I wanted? Not what I needed or what was practical, but what I actually wanted." "Tell me," Thomas said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand in his. "I want Margaret to have a stable home," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to be able to breathe without constantly worrying about bills. I want—" She paused, gathering her courage, then continued with more certainty. "I want to be with someone who sees me, really sees me, not just what I can do or provide, but who I actually am, at my core." "I see you, Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice filled with tenderness. "I see a woman of incredible strength and grace. I see someone who has faced unimaginable hardship and chosen love over bitterness. I see someone who has raised an extraordinary little girl despite overwhelming odds. And I see someone I could very easily fall in love with if I'm being honest." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "I think I'm already falling." 6 months later, Thomas proposed to Eleanor in the very same church where Margaret had first prayed. He had coordinated the event with Father Michael, who had recently returned from his sabbatical. Margaret was present, of course, dressed in her finest dress, clutching a small bouquet of freshly picked wildflowers. "Eleanor Sullivan," Thomas said, kneeling before her in the sacred space, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Margaret have changed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You've taught me what really matters. You've shown me that success isn't measured in dollars, but in moments of connection, in laughter, in love. Will you marry me? Will you let me be the father Margaret prayed for, and the partner you deserve?" Eleanor, tears streaming freely down her face, nodded emphatically. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Margaret let out a squeal of pure delight and ran to envelop them both in a hug. "God answered my prayer. I told you he would, Mama," she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with joy. "You certainly did, baby," Eleanor said, laughing and crying simultaneously. Thomas scooped Margaret up into his arms, holding her close as Eleanor wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a circle of love and belonging. "Thank you for praying," He whispered to the little girl, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "Thank you for having faith. That's what prayers are for," Margaret said with the simple, unadulterated wisdom of childhood. "To help God know what we need." The wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the same church 3 months later. Thomas had offered to arrange something elaborate, a grand celebration befitting his wealth and status. But Eleanor had insisted on a simple gathering, just family and close friends, a testament to the deep, personal connection they shared. Margaret served as the flower girl, taking her role with utmost seriousness and walking down the aisle with perfect precision, scattering rose petals along the way. In his vows, Thomas spoke eloquently about unexpected blessings and answered prayers, his voice filled with emotion. "I walked into this church looking for a moment of quiet," he said, his gaze locked on Eleanor. "I walked out having found my purpose. Eleanor, you and Margaret have given me a family. But more than that, you've given me a reason to be the man I always wanted to be." Eleanor's vows were simpler, yet no less profound. "You showed up," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "When I had every reason not to trust, to not hope, you showed up. And you kept showing up, consistently, faithfully. And now I know you'll keep showing up for the rest of our lives. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for being the answer to a little girl's prayer." They moved into a house together, leaving behind Thomas's sterile penthouse apartment. They created a real home, filled with warmth and laughter, with a sprawling yard where Margaret could play and a cozy kitchen where they could cook together, creating lasting memories around the dinner table. Thomas consciously reduced his hours at work, delegating more responsibilities and trusting his team. He discovered the profound joy of helping with homework, of reading bedtime stories, of attending parent-teacher conferences and weekend soccer games, embracing the simple pleasures of family life. Eleanor, with Thomas's unwavering support and encouragement, returned to school, pursuing the teaching degree she had always dreamed of. She discovered a passion for shaping young minds, for helping children explore the world with curiosity and wonder. She thrived in her role as a kindergarten teacher, finding fulfillment in her work and bringing that joy home to her family. And Margaret thrived, surrounded by the love and stability she had always longed for. She had a father who attended every school play, who helped her build elaborate science fair projects, who instilled in her the belief that dreams were worth pursuing. She had a mother who was rested and happy, who could finally be fully present in her life, no longer burdened by constant worry and exhaustion. She had a family, a place to belong, a sense of security that had previously been absent from her young life. Years later, when Margaret was a teenager, she found Thomas sitting in his study one evening, gazing intently at a framed photograph from their wedding day, a wistful expression on his face. "Dad?" she said, the simple word still warming Thomas's heart every time he heard it. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you remember that day we met in the church?" "Every detail," Thomas said, his voice filled with affection. "Did you really hear my prayer? Or did Mama tell you later what I'd said?" Thomas smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I really heard it, Margaret. I heard every word. What were you doing there in the church, anyway?" Thomas considered the question thoughtfully, reflecting on the circumstances that had led him to that pivotal moment. "I was lost," he said finally, his voice soft. "Not physically, but in every other way that matters. I had everything I thought I wanted, material success beyond my wildest dreams, but I was empty inside. And then I heard you praying with such faith, such love, and it woke me up. It reminded me what life is really about." Margaret nodded thoughtfully, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I'm glad you were there," she said sincerely. "I'm glad God made sure you heard. So am I, sweetheart. So am I." "Can I tell you a secret?" Margaret asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Always. When I prayed that day, I wasn't just asking for a dad for Mama," she confided, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I was asking for a dad for me, too. But I didn't say that part out loud because I didn't want to be selfish." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. He rose from his chair and embraced his daughter tightly, holding her close. That wouldn't have been selfish, Margaret. That would have been honest. And for what it's worth, I got exactly what I needed, too. A daughter who changed my life. A family that gave me purpose. Margaret hugged him back fiercely, her love palpable. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. Later that night, lying in bed beside Eleanor, Thomas reflected on the improbable chain of events that had brought them together. A child's prayer in an empty church. A moment of vulnerability. A willingness to take a chance on something uncertain. What are you thinking about? Eleanor asked, snuggling closer to him. Just how grateful I am, Thomas said, his voice filled with contentment. How lucky we are. Not luck, Eleanor said softly, a gentle smile gracing her lips. Faith, love, and answered prayers. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the universe, perhaps a benevolent force smiled, knowing that sometimes the most profound answers to prayers come not through dramatic miracles or divine intervention, but through the simple willingness of human hearts to open, to trust, and to love unconditionally. Because that's the real miracle in the end. Not that God answers prayers, but that He works through ordinary people, giving them the courage to be extraordinary for each other, to show up, to stay, to love without reservation. Margaret had prayed for a father for her mother, but what she had really prayed for was family, connection, love, a place to call home. And in that small church on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, with stained glass windows casting colored light across worn wooden pews, her prayer had been heard and answered, transforming lives and creating a bond that would endure for a lifetime.